Welcome to Mzansi Unicorns. My name is Teddy Kuzwayo, and I'll be your host for today. The show is about showcasing South Africa's talents, businessmen and women, and entrepreneurs across different industries. On today's episode, we have Alon Lits, none other than South Africa's very first Uber driver. Yeah. Alon,
Awesome.
welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah. So, tell us about yourself. How did you even become an Uber driver?
Yeah, so that's a lifetime ago now.
Yeah.
I was fortunate to join Uber back in 2013.
Yeah.
I was their first employee in Africa, initially general manager for Uber in Johannesburg,
Okay.
and was ultimately there for 7 years as director for Sub-Saharan Africa.
Okay.
So how did I join Uber? I guess a bit of luck and timing. So
Yeah.
prior to that, maybe a little bit more prior to that, started my career off in banking, spent a couple of years off in the banking world. I didn't want to be a career banker.
Yeah.
And had studied relatively technical undergrads and postgrads prior to that. So always had this idealistic vision of, going overseas and completing an MBA. So I was fortunate to do that back in 2012. I went to French business school.
How's your French?
I was in Singapore for the year. So
Oh, really?
my French is very poor.
Yeah.
So did that, came back to South Africa.
Yeah.
Knew I didn't want to go the traditional MBA route, which was for a lot of people in my cohort going into the consulting world, and wanted to do something in the startup world. This was back in 2013. There were startups, and a lot of those are huge
the
success
whole
stories.
concept of startups wasn't really common.
Yeah, it wasn't.
then.
You got some, really stand out success stories that still exist today. The likes of, Luno or Yoko were probably, kind of the early success stories that were starting off back in 2013.
In South Africa.
In South Africa,
that is.
yeah. But there wasn't much going on in that world, exactly to your point.
Yeah.
And even though that was the career I wanted to pursue, given my my banking background, the more natural progression was to get involved with private equity. Even though I wanted to get involved in these startups, I knew that I wanted to do something entrepreneurial and didn't feel at that point quite ready to take that plunge myself. So started working with a private equity fund, which is a whole other story. I think going through the private equity experience, when I was interviewing for roles, everyone was like, well, do you have private equity experience?
Of course. They always ask that.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, obviously you don't have.
Yeah, exactly.
But at some point you need to have.
How am I going to get private equity
Exactly.
experience without private equity experience? So, ultimately what I actually did was I found a fund and I said, listen, just let me do an unpaid internship so I can say that I've got private equity experience, because otherwise I was just going through this continuous cycle of hitting my head against the wall. But anyway, all of that a bit of an aside. While I was working with the private equity fund, I was approached by Uber about the role to join them as general manager.
They approached you?
Yeah.
Okay.
And why I say, luck and timing, the recruiter was French, obviously recognized the French business school. And at that point in time,
the interview was not in French.
No, it was not. Again,
Otherwise,
thankfully, otherwise I wouldn't have gone too far. But went through that process. Didn't know much about Uber at that point in time. Obviously, the more I researched it, the more compelling the opportunity sounded. Quite a unique thing to be sitting here in South Africa and have the opportunity to be part of, a Silicon Valley growth story. So, the more I kind of investigated, I saw that there were really strong funds behind the business, was really taking off at a global level. It was at the point where the likes of Goldman's had invested, was pre-Google Ventures investing. So it was a very interesting time in the growth story of Uber. Also, I remember my first interview, and I spent a lot of that first interview telling them all the reasons why I thought Uber wouldn't work in South Africa. So I was actually, I think in hindsight, quite grateful that they let me through the process despite my initial skepticism. And, went through that process, and it was quite a robust process. Was still early on in that. There were roughly, 200 or less employees globally.
Okay.
I was still interviewed
including
by
drivers.
No, driver number would have been a lot higher, obviously, just given a footprint of about 34 cities at that point in time, 30 cities at that point in time.
Okay.
But 200 direct employees at that point in time. was still interviewed by Travis, who was a CEO, and initially reported into Ryan Graves, who was a COO for Uber at that point.
So you're pretty senior then.
Look, I think
you were like driving Uber Black.
I used to roll around in Uber Black when it was still quite a novelty back in the day. It always used to be interesting. I think, the business or the product that really scaled Uber, and this is true in South Africa, but true globally as well, is the Uber X product. But it's quite interesting if you had to go back in time, was there value that Uber Black created for the brand? And I think the answer is yes, because what it did do is it positioned Uber as something aspirational, where especially in the early days in Joburg, Cape Town, etc., when people would see someone arriving at a club or a party, and all of a sudden they were rolling in a BMW or a Mercedes, people like, who is this person? They must be a celebrity. Like it was, people would bring out their phones, take a picture. It was just such a novel, uncommon thing at that point in time. Whereas if you started off with Toyotas, you probably wouldn't have had that same wow factor. And that wow factor, I think, was critical in increasing the kind of the interest and the aspirational element of the brand in those early days.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm very curious. One, as employee number one at Uber, and this global startup entering South Africa and Africa, how scary was it actually taking on such a big role, just at the very beginning, as employee number one? Did you feel like you were ready for it, and how far did it obviously take you? I mean, at what point did you get before you left Uber now, right?
Yeah, I've left Uber.
Okay.
Yeah,
so where did you start and how did it end? I mean, that journey.
Yeah. So I think, maybe naivety or what it was initially, but probably didn't quite know what I was getting myself into, and the things that I kind of dealt with at Uber were never things that I anticipated dealing with career-wise. But, in hindsight, have all been very valuable. And I've learned a lot and grown a lot. And I'm also a strong believer is that, I think people are often more capable than they're given credit for. I think something that US companies do exceptionally well is that they're less focused on, how many years experience people have or how long they've been within the organization. If they identify top performers, those top performers are given the opportunity to take on more responsibility and grow, regardless of kind of their level of experience or the time that they've spent in the company.
They're not going to ask you how many years of Uber experience.
Yeah, exactly. It's not exactly. I mean, obviously, the earlier you there, the easier it is to grow. But what you did before is almost irrelevant. I think probably the best story of that's not mine. It's the first marketing intern at Uber was hired to do marketing and did that well. And then turned around to the team in San Francisco and said, I think this will work in Boston. Can I go launch it in Boston? And they said, sure, why not? You're doing a good job so far on what you're hired to do. So she went off to Boston and launched Uber in Boston, and she became the global head of expansion for Uber. Okay. And with someone who had very limited experience before, was one of the probably top 10 most senior people at Uber globally when this was a 25,000 plus person organization. So I think that kind of mindset of top people who do well should grow is something that probably SA corporate could learn more from. But that's a bit of an aside. Going back to my story, I think, it was probably a little bit intimidating arriving there. Like I remember one of the first trips that we did globally with Uber was to Miami. Uber hadn't launched in Miami yet, and they brought the entire company together, about 200, 300 people at that point in time.
So it launched in Joburg
before Miami. Yeah, there was regulatory reasons why.
That's impressive.
I think quite surprising to all the Americans when I was there and the South African team were there and was in South Africa, but not Miami. But why I raise that is it's quite intimidating because you arrived there, the US team kind of knew each other because they'd been around for longer. There were probably about 30 cities that were in the US and then a handful of cities around the world. And the city teams at that point in time were 3 people. So a general manager, drive operations manager, and a marketing manager. And I already just had met the other 2 people in my team. And you had all these other international, non-American countries there, and they were kind of 3 people groups. And then you had a group of probably 150 Americans all knew each other. You come in there as this like, team out of South Africa, like you really do feel quite intimidated. But I think it's something which we've discussed separately before. I think generally South Africans underestimate themselves, and I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking generally. It was also something I experienced when I did the MBA, where you meet these people who sound so international. And what I mean by that, you meet someone, they were born in the US, they studied in the UK, and they've worked in New York, Tokyo, and London, and they sound like the most impressive person that you've ever met. And they are impressive. I'm not taking anything away from them. But what I learned over time is that when you meet impressive South Africans who may not be playing on that international, the same brands or the same countries, doesn't make them any less impressive as individuals. I think it's just a function of, maybe they haven't had the same exposure as those who are, working in the London, New York, or Tokyos of the world.
It's interesting you say that, because a good friend of mine, his older brother, we were dressed together. His older brother went to Harvard Business School about 2011, 2012, and he came first.
Yeah, amazing.
Which, in a way, now that you talk about South Africans they almost like don't know what they're capable of. They're actually more than capable.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're really impressive people.
Yeah. No, like I maintain the best, of South Africa is the best of the world, right? And I think our standard just generally as well is super high. Going back to Uber, I think something else is just, so going back to my story, then kind of linking back to that point is I was ultimately there for 7 years in 2015. So joining 2013, just as Uber launched in Johannesburg. I think I remember kind of the first kind of secret Ubers, they called it, were on the road on the Wednesday. I had my final interview on the Thursday, and then I had an offer on the Friday and started the following week. So pretty much
in the same week.
Pretty much as Uber was launching. And then Cape Town launched, and then we launched Durban. Maybe two interesting stats is that Joburg was the 34th city globally, so really early on in the life cycle. And something else which most people don't know is that South Africa was the first country outside of the US to have 3 cities operational at the same time.
3 cities, Joburg, Cape Town, Durban.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I think the reason for that was just that there was just, there was nothing like Uber before Uber here in South Africa, right? Yes, there were meter taxis, but I think, cost, quality, either very expensive or quality quite poor. So it wasn't saying
taxis.
that,
And
taxis, right, 100%. And so there was kind of this unaddressed market opportunity here where Uber filled that gap. And obviously starting off with Uber Black and ultimately with Uber X, which really scaled the solution.
Oh, it started with Uber Black. Oh,
yes,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We only launched Uber X probably, 7 to 12 months later. So yeah.
Okay. And then at what point did you expand outside of South Africa? And I mean, what was that turning point? Was it driven by you?
So I think it was just a global push. I think Uber just wanted to get to as many cities globally as they could. So initially that was not something that I was involved in. In probably towards kind of 2014, end of launching in Kenya and Nigeria, in Nairobi and Lagos. Towards May of 2015, I started getting involved in both of those markets, officially from August of those years. But they were relatively small businesses in Lagos and Nairobi. We then expanded in both of those countries to new cities, focused on those cities, really scaling the UberX product. 2016 was a big year for us. We launched 3 countries in 3 weeks. We launched Ghana, Uganda, and Tanzania. So that was quite a whirlwind.
Different parts of the continent.
A lot of flying around on the continent. Still when SAA were thankfully flying quite frequently. So it made it quite easy to get around the continent, although travel on the continent is a lot harder than it should be, which is a whole other discussion. But launched those 3 countries in 3 weeks. Focused on those markets for a period of time. And then ultimately launched Ivory Coast in 2019. So that was our first venture into Francophone Africa.
With your French.
Yeah, exactly. Excuse me.
Yeah. So I want to actually go outside of Uber for a bit. In your interest in studying overseas is you could have studied anywhere here. Wits, UCT, UKZN. What made you choose overseas?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to I'd lived, studied, and worked in South Africa prior to that, right? So I'd never had international exposure. So for me, it was this opportunity to just get exposure to the world outside of South Africa. When I studied, I always knew I wanted to come back to SA, but at the same time, I wanted that opportunity just to broaden my horizon and get exposed to other markets, other cultures, other countries.
How many South Africans were at INSEAD then?
So probably about 6 or so South Africans in my year. It's spread across the way the intake worked was 2 different campuses, so Singapore and the French campus.
And Fontainebleau.
Yeah, exactly. And interestingly, prior to the program, there were quite a few non-South Africans that were in South Africa. And post the program, there were actually quite a few non-South Africans that landed up in South Africa. Maybe interestingly, but disappointingly, very few here today. There are almost none of the non-South Africans I studied with are still here, and quite a few of the South Africans I studied with are not here. So, if anyone from the government's listening, maybe there's things that need to get fixed.
But was there an interest for you to actually stay overseas? Because quite often, and you see a lot of South Africans actually leave to go abroad, study abroad, and want to stay abroad. So quite interested in finding out why you came back. I mean, was it by choice or just by design?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think to your point and to maybe your earlier comment as well, is that I think if you look at those South Africans who've stayed overseas, they've done exceptionally well. And there are multiple examples beyond those obvious names like Elon Musk that people throw around, right? But why did I want to come back? I think, friends and family and my life is here, right? So there's that element. And I think the other thing is I do care about South Africa and I want to drive an impact and make an impact here. So for me, it was always a temporary thing versus a full-time element. I think, the other kind of piece, which is maybe a more practical piece, is if I was looking at myself as, my career, right, where am I going to be more differentiated as well? Right, like if I go to London or Hong Kong or the US, post the program, I'm one of thousands, of people with very similar backgrounds, but no local experience, right? Whereas if I came back to South Africa, just practically again, you're one of a handful. Plus, this is where I'm from, right? I've got the context, I've got the experience, and you're just more differentiated. So there was also that factor, just practically, which played into the decision.
And I mean, you mentioned that South Africans underestimate themselves, and I'm just curious, what is it that South Africans, what is it that we experience here that almost prepares us to be successful overseas? Like what's that grit?
I think it's just that problem-solving nature, right?
We just make a plan.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I really do believe that sort of comes down to, and I think it's also in South Africa, everything's also a bit of a negotiation, right? A silly example, go to a restaurant and what's on the menu is a guide versus a menu. Whereas I think, other cultures, and obviously there's some that are worse or different or some that are similar, but what's on the menu is what you eat, and there's no kind of wiggle room around that, as silly as that example is. But I think, why I raise it, I think there are 2 things: your problem solving point, that we always make a plan, and innovation's often driven by necessity, right? And I think if you look at, probably the recent trend in solar in South Africa, right? We'll be the world leader in kind of residential solar and probably commercial solar just because we have to, right? Because, well, if we relied on, Eskom, we would not have power. So that necessity drives innovation. I think the other element around my menu example is that we're thinking outside of the box, right? You're not just thinking about, well, this is my set of options and I've got to choose from these options. You're thinking, okay, well, this is what I've been told, but I've got some other ideas, right? And I think that mindset is what drives it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't like anything here. How about we do it this way?
So what would be your encouragement then to South Africans living abroad? I mean, there's tons. Our diaspora is massive. Australia, Europe, the US, other parts of the globe. Maybe not so much Africa. But they say the grass is not green on the other side. I mean, what would be your encouragement? You don't have any regrets coming home?
No, I mean, I definitely don't. I'm very happy to be here. I think going back to the Uber story, and I will answer, I'm not skirting it. I think, I was at Uber ultimately for 7 years. I was director for the business in sub-Saharan Africa. If I wanted to grow within the organization at that point, it probably meant leaving South Africa. And for me, I did not want to leave South Africa, right? So, after 7 years, it was just time for me to move on and look for other opportunities beyond the world of Uber. And that's the business that I care about. And, still a lot of people there that I'm constantly in touch with. So in terms of kind of my advice.
Uber vouchers or that benefit?
So unfortunately, no Uber vouchers. That is quite sad.
Yeah.
But between me and my wife, we still have one car.
Okay.
So I Ubered here today, and I'll be Ubering
Uber
home
X
later.
or Uber Black?
Uber Comfort.
Somewhere in between.
Yeah, exactly.
But Comfort is always like
Bit of a lucky
experience
packet.
Yeah, it's a bit of black and X. So sometimes a Comfort will be a black. I'm
Yeah,
sure
and then you win,
if the Uber Black guy is like, you know what, I'll just take it. But sometimes it's an X, which is quite disappointing.
Yeah. Probably a whole other discussion, but I think they've got a big focus on quality, so I expect things to be on the up there.
Yeah.
But yeah, going back to this question around the like South Africans abroad, like work. Look, I mean, I think my only advice would be that don't underestimate yourself. But I think like most South Africans hopefully don't once they've been overseas for long enough, or don't think that they're any less talented than those individuals that they come across wherever they may be. Obviously, I'm passionate and I'm here and I want to be here and I want to kind of make an impact here. So hopefully those that are experiencing it, the grass may not be greener, is that no decision is a forever decision, right? I think that's always, something which, I think I remember when I was thinking about the MBA, I was deciding between two different schools, and it was an excruciating decision, like which decision do I make? So it was a US school, Columbia. They had a shorter program there.
Yeah.
And ultimately opted for INSEAD because it kind of had a better reputation when it came to the shorter program. And two, knowing that I didn't want to land up in the US, it made more sense to tap into a global network versus a US-centric network that would come from Columbia. But the point that I raised there is that more so that you got to make the best decision based on the information that you have at that point in time, right? If new information comes to light, it doesn't mean that you can't adjust your decision. Another factor which I actually used to make the decision for INSEAD to go to Singapore was I thought there'd be value in kind of understanding the East, getting exposure to like Hong Kong, China, etc., from a trade perspective or a business opportunity perspective in the future. And that's actually something that didn't transpire. I didn't really, tap into that, or, I haven't done any business with any Southeast Asian countries as a result. But why I raise that is just that, well, at the time, that was the hypothesis and it was proven to be wrong. That informed the decision, but just because, it was an assumption before, you got to change your assumptions as new information comes to light and adjust your decision making.
But, it's interesting you say, didn't want to be in the US because you may not have had a choice now. You would have been deported to El Salvador.
Yeah, exactly. So, interesting. I think, all that being said, now in our current business, we are focused on the US.
Oh, really?
But yeah, at the time.
Are you allowed to operate there?
Yeah.
Okay.
So far, it hasn't been an issue. I think, if anything, if we mention South Africa, people just, make some reference to Musk, and sometimes positive, sometimes negative, depending on who you're speaking to. But yeah, it hasn't been a problem. I think if anything, there's still like a lot of positivity. Like, I don't know, like with all the kind of press that, around South Africa recently, like, I think there's a lot of concern around safety and people visiting here, but people are, it's like an alluring, exotic place to be coming from. So it's quite a good, talking point. And actually, we're going to a conference now at the end of the month in San Diego. And, our prize, if you book a demo with us, is going to be a trip for two to South Africa. And already we're seeing a lot of interest in that. So I think people like South Africa, and it's a good conversation starter. We'll bring some SA wine over and show off the best that we have to offer.
So bring Trump over as well. He's never been here before. I don't think.
Yeah.
But
think
I'm sure he'd change his mind.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a battle that we're going to fight.
Current business, I think you transitioned over to, after Uber, you transitioned to wellness?
Yeah, so a very different world, as you say.
Okay.
Left Uber, this was back in 2020. So going on 5 years now. So as I say, Uber's a lifetime ago for me. Initially,
That was before COVID, actually.
I was kind of in the middle of COVID. So COVID hit, and, Uber in COVID was an interesting place to be, in that, both on the rides and the eat side, that business, which was a substantial business, was shut down overnight. Right? I mean, like if, it's a distant memory now, but like literally no one can move around, right? And in the early days of lockdown, they didn't even allow takeaway, which was crazy. But anyway.
How are people meant to eat?
Yeah. Like, I mean, it was, anyway, there are a lot of interesting laws that in hindsight made no sense. At the time, that one made no sense either. But the bottom line is, like, that was an interesting experience for me at Uber. How did we kind of navigate that? And, what I kind of navigated that with the team, felt that we kind of reached a point where, we weren't through the worst of it, but we were probably through the worst of it, and you could at least start seeing a light. There was still a very big journey to go back on to kind of rebuild the business. But I think a lot of kind of leading the team across all the different countries through COVID was a very big, very tough experience. Learned a lot, but I think, a lot of learnings around how do you keep the team motivated when there was so much outside of our control. The product was still perfect, right? But no one was moving around. So what could you do? And really focusing the team on things that they could do to motivate them through that difficult period of time. So we kind of went through that, the worst of it. And, a lot of the regulation was easing and the business was slowly coming back to life. But for me, it was a good opportunity also to kind of reflect and think about what it was that I wanted to do. And, I'd been head down. I was there for 7 years, loved my time there, as I said, but it was just time for a change. So it took a bit of time out. Idealistically, had this vision. I wanted to get involved in either education or healthcare. The reason for that is, again, we can have a debate about Uber, but one of the things that I loved about my time at Uber was this opportunity to marry profit with purpose, right, or impact, where, we were a huge driver of economic opportunity across the continent, and wanted to take that experience and apply it to a different world, being education or tech, and those are two sectors that were already benefiting from technology. So was introduced to my co-founder. He's a clinical psychologist. His name's Alon Lits, and he was previously the co-founder of the Akeso Hospital Group. So that's the largest group of psychiatric hospitals here in South Africa.
Wow.
So that's a business that he built over 10 plus years, sold it to Netcare. The way that Alon describes his career is that it's really been about scaling impact. So he started off in a world where he was treating 8 patients a day in private practice, to the hospital or the hospitals where they were treating over 800 patients a day. Across, about 10 different sites. So, he had left Netcare after selling the business, and he was thinking about how do you continue to scale impact. And the natural kind of next iteration of his career is leveraging technology. And that's where our different but common experience common passion came in. And we started working on this initiative called Panda now October, towards the end of 2020, beginning of 2021.
So what's the journey been like since then?
Yeah, so I think the reality of startups is it's a roller coaster.
Another round of startups.
Yeah, exactly.
Now this is your own startup.
Yeah, exactly. I always say that Uber was startup for dummies, and that it was a startup. It was an unknown brand, and we had to build it. But you had a lot of comfort around you, right? In that you had a product which people wanted, and was a function of just kind of operationalizing that product and scaling it. And there were a lot of things as a founder which I didn't need to worry about, right? We almost had access to unlimited capital, and you had central functions and expertise that you could leverage, as well as expertise from your peers in other cities, which Uber was really good at doing and sharing. But the world of startup is, you don't have those comforts, and you've got to do everything yourself. I think something, though, which we kind of adopted as a mindset early on is that we could have spent an infinite amount of time perfecting the product in theory. But what we wanted to avoid was getting trapped in this world of theory and moving to a world of practice. And again, learning
analysis paralysis.
Exactly. I mean, you could have the best model, the best presentation, or the best theoretical product, but you don't know until it's in people's hands and you're testing and you're learning. So something we always used to say at Uber, and we do the same thing here, is that done's better than perfect. Right. And you can improve on done. Right. But you need to get it done so you can learn what works, what doesn't, double down on what works, and kind of do less of what doesn't work and grow from there. So that's really been a big focus. And, so we got a product live as quickly as we could. I think when we started on the journey, it was very mental health focused, and that's definitely still a core component of what we do. But it's not everything. We had this vision of kind of democratizing access to mental health, especially in the context of South Africa, but it really rings true globally, where you need new interventions and not enough professionals to treat the pandemic that exists. And, despite life getting easier, in inverted commas, based on kind of global metrics, it's also harder, and people are having, more challenges than they've ever had before. And I think the rate of change that, we're experiencing as the world is only going to accelerate. Again, something which I always say to the team, something which, I say generally, is that the only constant is change. And I think people need to be prepared to navigate that change, because the world is going to change at a pace we've never seen before. But it was really about, how do we make mental health care more accessible, more scalable, more impactful. And that's where we started on the journey. We always knew we wanted to build a B2B focused business. And what was interesting for us is that as much as many businesses speak about kind of well-being within the workforce, it's often seen as a nice to have versus a have to have.
And an HR thing.
Exactly, not core to the business. And it's also very easy to delay that budget or cut that budget when times are tough. Right. So how do we deliver a solution which was core to the business and wasn't just something that HR dealt with?
And when times are tough, it's actually the other way, right? It means that people's mental well-being is equally tough, if not worse.
Exactly. So I think as we better understood that space, and we've spoken to more customers, really, evolved the solution. And as I've said, well-being is a core component, but we also offer modules which focused on employee engagement and productivity. We offer a module focused on learning and development. We offer a module focused on holistic health, because even though these things are separate, they're all interrelated. And ultimately, we work with our clients to help them move the needle on metrics that matter. What are those metrics? Metrics which are related to well-being, but are maybe more measurable. And, these metrics that all of a sudden your CEO or your COO or CFO care about. Things like, the level of employee productivity, your cost of churn, your cost of burnout, your cost of poor employee engagement. So there's really the ways that we work with our clients.
But just dumb it down for me. Just simplify it. So what is your business? When you talk about it, it's in the construct of mental well-being, which is not just general wellness. But what is it? So just explain it to me like a 4-year-old.
So the reality is we're constantly evolving, right? And I think that is necessary as a startup. But what are we, right? We work with our clients to help them improve employee engagement, in short. And how do we do that? We do that both top down and bottom up. What do I mean by that? We give employees within your business access to a broad range of tools to help them, build their resilience, their mental toughness, their high agency mindset, their ability to kind of navigate and deal with change or challenge. And then on the other side, we surface very detailed insights and analytics for leaders so they can understand the issues or the opportunities that their teams are facing. And we help them use that data to drive change back to the business. So it's very much about, identifying where are their problems, both at an individual level, problems or opportunities, as well as a business level, and using that data to then drive change, again, bottoms up and top down.
Are you seeing positive penetration locally?
Yeah. So
are there companies that actually get it?
Yeah. I mean, as I said, I think, so we brought our B2B solution to market end of 2023. So been, going on 2 years now. And the thing about B2B sales and the reality, I think most people maybe, obvious when I say it, but maybe not obvious when you're going into it, is the hardest thing about B2B sales is B2B sales, right? It goes back to that private equity point that I was talking about earlier, in that, we would be in client pitches and, people would be, I love your product, but then the next question would be, who are your other clients? Yeah. And in those early days, it's very difficult to get those other clients, right? Because you don't have any clients. So how can you get the first clients? So you've got to get that initial momentum and get those logos behind you. And the more momentum you have, the more momentum you build, because all of a sudden you've got more credibility. So B2B sales is very much a credibility game. And I think that's been a very steep learning curve for me personally. I wasn't saying that I had experience with at Uber. We did a lot of partnerships, but the Uber brand just opened up doors, right? And now all of a sudden you had to build that credibility and kind of understand the art and a bit of science behind B2B sales. So that's been interesting. We've also expanded into the US. Again, face a bit of a chicken and egg. So we've taken an interesting approach to that market, where we've got a distribution partner that has a version of our tech that they make available to their clients. And that helps us overcome this chicken and egg in that market as well, where we, through them are servicing US clients and US users. And we're slowly building out a direct sales engine in that market as well.
And is it just US or other parts of the world as well?
So actively selling into the US and South Africa at this point, and more opportunistic elsewhere. I think, again, one of the realities of a startup is, and I think this rings true of any size business, to be honest, but is you need a level of focus. So at the moment, rather than stretch ourselves too thin, the focus is on those two markets.
And why the US?
That's an interesting one. I think, it's the biggest opportunity, of English speaking countries, which was a factor. If we look at, kind of high level numbers, mental health spend in South Africa is about $1 billion a year.
Really? That much?
If you kind of look at both kind of direct and indirect costs, it's a big number. Well, not even indirect costs, direct spending on mental health. In the UK, it's about 18 billion. In the US, it's over 218 billion. So the US is, more than 10 times bigger than the UK. And, based on our research, we believe that the US is less competitive than the UK, given the size of the market. So, maybe there are a higher number of absolute competitors, but just because it's such a big market, it's less crowded. And we, again, maybe back to an earlier comment, backing ourselves, right, and saying that, we want to play in the biggest market in the world, and we believe we've got a product that's as good as any, and we can make a dent there. And again, because it's such a big market, you don't need to get it right in a massive way. Hopefully we will. But if you don't, you just need to get it right in a very small way, and you can hopefully build quite a meaningful business.
And then I think I saw on your website that you've got an office in London, but you're operating in the US. How does that work?
Yeah, so, some of that was just for kind of fundraising and just maybe to an earlier comment as well, where people are comfortable kind of contracting. So, a lot of our contracts and our IP sit out of the UK, and obviously all the kind of necessary protocols, admin, etc. sits there as well.
I want to actually bring it back home. And just what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced here? Building Uber, now running your business, pitching logos that don't exist. But actually with Uber, because I recall there were a lot of pickets and strikes and beta taxis and taxis and also getting around those regulations.
So we could have a whole podcast on that. I think, I think the kind of just talking regulation, I think the reality there was that, and this rings true for Uber, but I think it rings true, you're kind of seeing it in the world of AI at the moment, in that regulation is lagging innovation, right? And that, in the world of Uber, you had this technology which really can transform the industry, but regulation didn't cater for it. I remember having my first regulatory meetings back in 2014. The NLTA was signed last month, right? So 10 years or 11 years later. And I'm not even sure what the final format of that looks like. But I mean, imagine Uber had to wait 11 years, right? What would that mean? Like, you can't wait for that. Did Uber make some mistakes in the early days? Probably. Could they be maybe a little bit more, I don't know, like bringing people along with them, or less combative in the early days? Arguably yes, arguably not. But I think it goes back to an earlier comment. It was very hard to be taken seriously, right, with an idea, right? Like, I remember having some meetings, especially in Gauteng, with provincial authorities, and we were almost laughed out of the room, where people thought this would never work or would never scale, and we're wasting our time.
Look at your profile. You're this young white kid.
I mean, what do I know about? Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't really blame them.
Yeah.
So I think you do need to kind of, kind of embrace ambiguity. It was never about breaking laws. It was about embracing ambiguity and proving it out and building out that credibility. So I think that was a big learning. How do you build that credibility, right? And show people that actually this is worth taking seriously. And I think, again, a lot of learnings around stakeholder management. How do we become a partner to the meter taxi industry? How do we become a partner to the existing industry that exists? How do we uplift the industry together? And I think those are all things which, maybe mistakes were made, but hopefully we, identified those mistakes and, try to learn from them and do things better. And also, what were the challenges that existed in those industries, and how can you address them leveraging technology? Something which I always say is that no form of transport is 100% safe, right? Whether you're walking, driving yourself, riding a bicycle, taking a taxi, right? But Uber introduces traceability, trackability, and accountability that didn't exist, right? And those are, the risks of any form of transport exist, but Uber, you've got all these benefits that don't exist in all the other modes. So, how can you use that to make the industry bigger? And I think for me, bringing it back to October Health today is that, I'm in a very different world to the world I was in at Uber. But how can you think about a traditional industry and do things differently, right? And, how can you do things that work in the way that they used to work, but how can you leverage technology or introduce new innovation to make things better? And I think it's really about, we had this value at Uber about challenging the status quo, right? And I think that, is a principle which Uber applied to itself, and argue that, Uber X was cannibalizing the Uber Black business. But if Uber didn't do it, someone else would, right? And I think, that's something which, traditional business is also not often, it's not an easy thing to do. If you've got this great big business, right? Like Google search is a good example, that may be cannibalized by AI. Do you embrace AI, or do you try and defend your business, which might become legacy and you'll be left behind? So that need to constantly challenge the status quo is a principle we applied at October Health, is a principle we applied at Uber. And I think a learning that those listening can hopefully apply to their own day-to-day.
I mean, is there anything linked to your upbringing that kind of just drove you to start thinking about this form of resilience and drive and confidence? I mean, anything personally that happened?
Yes, I would say I probably wasn't the most confident kid growing up, being honest. I think maybe goes back to an earlier kind of comment in that I don't think you know what you're necessarily capable of until you do it. So I think like the kind of learning would be kind of just push yourself to do things that you don't think are, that you don't think that you can do, and you might be surprised what you can do, right? I think something which I've always believed, I believed in hard work, right? And you can't like expect things without being willing to put in the hard work and roll up your sleeves, right? And if you want to kind of do big things, right, you've got to be prepared to sacrifice things as well, right? Or you've got to be prepared to work harder than other people, right? I don't think, maybe there are exceptions, and not maybe there are exceptions, obviously, but I think those exceptions are exceptions, right? The people who, you look at any field that, are extraordinary at what they do, it's because they outwork the people who are ordinary, right? And that applies both in, do they have the ability to do what they do, and do they have the mindset to just never give up? And I think, that's something which is important.
Biggest inspiration?
Yeah, good question. Like I mean, maybe if I kind of like just put it like closer to home. Like my dad was a pharmacist, my mom a social worker. So kind of on the October Health side, like always saw the work that she did in helping people, and he was just an exceptionally hard worker. So I think both those kind of just, set the groundwork, like, to kind of show me that, if you wanted to do things, you needed to work hard and just be determined and never give up.
It's funny how life goes full circle. Started off as a banker, then an Uber driver, and then you're back to wellness.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is what your parents are.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought I would have landed up here.
I mean, was it part of your plan or not really? It was just coincidence.
Yeah, I think coincidence. And, when I met Alon and he was looking to do some work in the space, it felt like the stars aligned, and that my mom's a social worker, my wife's a clinical psychologist, both of her parents are mental health professionals. So I felt like I knew a bit about the industry by osmosis and saw the impact that they kind of created in their day-to-day, and it was an opportunity to follow in their footsteps.
Alon, it's been a pleasure.
Awesome.
I think the impact that you're making in the world, especially around wellness, is really aspirational, and it's really a big inspiration, certainly for me and for many other people out there. Wellness is wildly underestimated. And when you say it's worth, what, $1 billion? It's probably worth more.
Yeah, look, it's a massive industry.
Spending
right?
enough on it.
Yeah, I think it's underestimated. And I think going back to my earlier comment, the only constant in the world is change, right? And if we don't, physical health people are thinking about like, exercise or better sleep or better nutrition, but how are we training our minds to handle everything that's coming at us? I think we're underestimating the work that needs to go into that.
I was having a conversation with someone the other day around work sick leave, and we're debating wellness as sick leave. Everyone gets flu and they obviously get sick leave, but if you're not mentally well, does that also qualify as sick leave?
Yeah.
Which is an interesting thing. Yeah.
And it's almost like, well, the people who are not sick should also get rewarded for that, right? Like can take a well day.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, so.
Okay. Anyways,
awesome.
It's been great. Thank you very much for coming over. And once again, all the best in your future.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today. This show was proudly sponsored by Medstone, a boutique advisory firm that focuses on business consulting locally and internationally. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share this episode. Until next time, chap chap.